Joanna J. Bryson is an associate professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Bath. Her research topics vary from artificial intelligence, autonomy, robot ethics, and human cooperation. Joanna recently wrote, "Many people know me as a researcher in AI ethics. My focus has never been purely AI. 2 of my 4 degrees are in social sciences. I've always viewed AI primarily as a means by which I can understand natural intelligence. Intelligence is the capacity to do the right thing in response to a context. Ethics is the means by which society maintains itself. Technology is a means by which we extend ourselves." It's all right. Joanna's talk will examine how understanding society changes itself as it develops intelligence extending technologies is key to recognizing appropriate measures for both developing and regulating AI. Please welcome Joanna to the stage. Thank you.
Have you got my mic on? Yeah, there we go. So unfortunately, my Mac is doing something completely crazy. So anyway, it's a long story, and I only have 20 minutes. Let's talk about AI instead. Okay. So, is AI changing the world? I liked the last talk, but I got to say yes. And part of that is because of the extent to which humans are rule followers. But we'll get to that later. Well, this is a rule. This is actually a rule of biology. This is a nice paper that's more known in biology because of what it has to say about sexual selection. But one of the side effects is that they show that the more you increase communication, the more you get focus on the group level. And I think this might explain one of the big issues in our society now that people don't talk as much maybe about as they should, which is the extent to which families have become deeply interdependent. We used to talk about it in terms of parents micromanaging their children, but really the children have an awful lot of sort of autonomy within the family and pushback, and they're taking a lot of the parents' time too. But it's like the whole family has become this organism that doesn't go anywhere without each other, and the kids don't run up and down the street anymore. They all get farmed to particular places at particular times. And there's enormous conferences about what's happened, why has parenting changed, why are we spending so much time parenting, why are the children not allowed to think for themselves? And as a university professor, we have to figure out how do we deal with these very new kinds of undergraduates that come in not being used to being away from this, right? So I think that's just one example of what happens when we brought in mobile phones. We increase the amount of communication, you get more group-oriented behavior, right? So, yeah, this would imply that with more AI, we also get more and faster coalitioning, right? So we can, not just AI, ICT in general. So what is Twitter and what is social media doing? We're finding new groups faster, and we can create these new groups and act in new groups in ways that are really interesting and challenging. Some things are great, like these new initiatives that we can throw up, and all these NGOs. I'm really fascinated about all these things that are happening in the middle. I can't judge this stuff. I gave Dawn so much trouble about bringing me here because I thought this was Bristol Anthropology, the department, and I'm like, wait, it's a conference? I don't know about these conferences. This is great. How did I know it was great before I got here? I keep making the wrong guess about this. I go to some stuff and it's terrible. I don't want to say some of the conferences I've been to were terrible. But then I go to other ones and they're amazing and I can't tell the difference. And I think it's partly because of the new kinds of institutions that are coming up, and we can build these so fast and on the fly because we have all these new communication skills that we can do all these things so much quicker. Anyway, this is science. That maybe not all the stuff. I've been speculating a lot, but that is literally a paper in Science. Right? And so this relationship between communication and group-oriented investment, this capacity to build new equilibria and find new ways to excel and to outcompete others who aren't using communication, is something that is it's a scientific law, right? And that doesn't mean it's totally true. Science is always an abstraction, but it does mean that we can go and test it, and there's evidence and things like that. When we talk about things like intelligence, that's a different kind of thing. And this is my favorite definition of intelligence. Now look, there's 7 definitions. I've got my favorite one, okay? the reason it's my favorite was I got taught it as an undergraduate, and maybe I got taught other ones and I don't remember them, because what I was interested in was why are animals intelligent and how is human intelligence different from animal intelligence, right? But I have heard colleagues I respect, colleagues from Bristol, I'm not going to name names again, who said, we can't possibly build AI because we don't even know what intelligence is. That's not how words work. This is a perfectly good definition, and I'm going to run with this definition, which you've already read, actually. But before I do run with it, I want to point out this is policy. This is not science. We've come to an agreement about how we use words, and then once we do that, we can go on and do more stuff, okay? And that's exactly the kind of thing that we can do as a species because our communication is so awesome, right? We got language, and we can talk about that. Actually, again, in 20 minutes, I can't, but I have papers about the Joanna Bryson theory of human uniqueness. Anyway, but I'll tell you. Wait, so I'm going to blow the time slightly, because that was too much of a tease. We happen to be the only ape or monkey that can do vocal imitation. So again, a little bit more communication. We picked up this extra skill. Now that skill has evolved in a lot of different species, birds, seals, like random things. So it's something that's easier to get. But when you have an ape that has a long life history and culture is a very big part of their survival strategy, it may have allowed the mimetic process of language to bootstrap, of evolving language. Okay, that was probably not worth having said, because I don't know how many people are just confused. But you can chase me. I'll give you, rather than a book to read, a paper to read. In fact, I already tweeted it. It's embodiment versus mimetics. I tweeted it in response to the previous talk. So, okay, back to my regularly scheduled talk. So as I said, basically a short version of that is intelligence is doing the right thing at the right time. A form of computation, right? It isn't magic. A lot of people think that AI is going to be perfect and true and neutral, and if you discover the right algorithm, you'll suddenly have omniscience. And if China discovers it first because they've put more money into it, then we're all just going to fall away, right? That's not how it works. It's a physical process. Computation is a physical process that takes time, space, and energy. All right? So that is like not what people care about. When they're caring about AI, they're like, okay, yeah, no. Some people just say that can't be intelligence because it doesn't explain why I'm special. And so then they say, well, maybe what I really care about is agency. Yeah, agency. And if you're Donald Davidson, again, this is definitions, then agency is fundamentally human. But the definition I got taught of agent, like in school, was it's something that changes the ecosystem. So a chemical agent is an agent that will have a chemical reaction, whereas these non-agents are things that are just neutral, right? So that's not the point either. This is the point. When you're trying to figure out why people care about AI, what they really care about is who's responsible, right? So a moral agent is a subset of all the agents that is considered responsible for their actions. And incidentally, that varies by society. So we, even in America, like even the different states don't agree about how old you have to be to consent to sex or how old you have to be to get married. Different countries don't agree about how old you have to be to fight in the military. Right? And that'll depend partly on how urgent fighting in the military is right now. So there, and this was already mentioned in a couple of the earlier talks, that there is a social component to what we consider ethics to be, right? And this is another thing, moral patience. Moral patiency is, are we obligated to take care of AI or anything, right? How do we decide what moral agents have to be taken care of, right? So for example, little babies are in most societies considered to be moral patients, but not moral agents. They aren't considered to know what they're doing, but they are considered to be something we have to take care of. More recently, we've started saying that the environment is a moral patient. Again, it sort of has agency. I don't know if you want to think about that as changing things, but anyway, it's something we need to keep going, possibly even if it's only just to keep ourselves alive. So that's a second order moral agent on us. Moral patiency on us, but that's a philosophical argument I don't want to get into. What these together are called our moral subjects, and sometimes people try to argue that you aren't, as I just mentioned. There's some argument that you can't be a moral patient if you're not a moral agent. whereas other people say that's ridiculous, like I just said with the baby thing, right? Okay. So this is the stuff people really cared about, but we don't get taught these words at school. But we're all very worried about this, and I think that's part of the reason for a lot of the arguments that were just being made about the whether AI is really possible and things like that, or if it's going to be 100. Whenever someone says we will understand that, but not for 100 years, they're saying not in my lifetime, and they're pushing it off. The same with consciousness; they do that a lot too. Okay. Now this is. Like everybody, you can look this stuff up. Go look in an encyclopedia. This is my weird deduction from this, because I think these are core to ethics, and so that implies that ethics is culturally specific. And I think usually I think I'm weird about this. I get attacked for this, but it was also what Don said at the beginning. So I guess I'm amongst friends in Bristolian anthropologists. All right. But I think that this is, we have, when we're thinking about how to sustain our society, well, some things are clearly universal, like, you don't want murder and you don't want theft and things like that. It's harder to keep your society together if you can't trust each other. But on the other hand, exactly what clothes you wear, which people feel really deeply, it would be unethical now if I just stripped to demonstrate this point, right? We'd all freak out, right? But so we feel really strongly that that's a strong ethical thing, but why? It's mostly that I'm signaling some kind of in-group identity about how I'm wearing these clothes. It's not because of, well, maybe it has something about men and rape, I don't know. But I don't think it's about keeping society together. All right. So where are we? Right. Yeah, I just said that. Okay, good. So the bottom line here is that I haven't even mentioned AI, but if you've got all this, then it's pretty trivial. Whoops. Well, it would be trivial if my thing was still working. Let's just actually try this one. Hello. Yeah, okay, there we go. Artificial intelligence is an artifact, okay, built intentionally. So it's not a big deal. It's a subset. Intelligence is a subset of all computation. It's a subset that produces action from context. And artificial intelligence is a subset of all the intelligent things, that's stuff we've built. And my argument is that that intention indicates our responsibility, although, again, that's a normative recommendation. That's not science, okay? But I think it follows from these other things I've said. All right. Have I used all my time already? Okay. So I would argue, as we heard already, again, I'm very fitting into this, that there's two fundamental problems that biology has to deal with all the time. One is basically how do we grow the pie? Right? How can we figure out, how can we find these equilibria so that we can have people live in the world and hopefully keep the world sustainable? The other is how do we share the pie we already have? All right? And these aren't, for a long time it hasn't been acceptable to say that there's any limit here. And I still, I don't know, guess what happened 70 years ago? But we're not. The main idea is that however many people we have on the planet, that if we moved the resources around, we'd be able to feed them. Some people are starting to talk about something called the donut ecology and say, well, maybe we should worry about sustainability in terms also of population. But anyway, however that goes, these are the two problems, and all species have them. There's a context in which you live, like. So I don't know if you remember hearing about like Jane Goodall discovering war, chimpanzee war. It's amazing if you read her biography. People came up and said, you found this thing, don't publish about it, because that'll just damage human society if we find out that war goes before, then we'll feel like we can just do that. And then when she published it, those same people took her apart and said that, well, she did the observations wrong, or they only had a war because she was, this woman was there feeding these animals. Right? But it's since got sustained by everybody else who went and looked, whether they were a woman or a man. They would go and look, and they would see chimpanzee war, too. And this is a nice paper that came out a few years ago that said of all the theories about why chimpanzees would fall into war, it turns out the main thing is just there's not enough resources. If there's not enough food, the group, they've known each other for years, they have great memories, they split into two, and then one group wipes out the other group. And they de-chimpify, as Jane Goodall says. They sometimes these happy, smiley chimps will fight anyway, but when they fight, and they can even kill each other, but they do it in a very ritualized way. But when they're fighting in this way, they treat each other like prey animals. They like twist off the limbs and things like it was a deer. All right? So they de-chimpify when they fight wars. But it's not just something we apes do. Well, I don't want to say that this is war. This is quite different, but it's interesting because this is just amoeba. And then sometimes these amoeba get together in some species and they get called slime molds because they can switch between being independent, autonomous beings, and then when they get stressed, they can change the way they socialize. All right, so they can shift into these various, so they can be like a slug that even has sort of eyes that can follow the light and try to get to a better place to live. And then if they're really starving, they give up and they start making spores like this. And now these guys are just dead. They're left on the ground. And scientists are around and try to figure that out. But anyway, people are a little different. This is not meant to be a male person. This is my androgynous person. And here's the androgynous person in a family. So they, people really can't actually operate very much on their own, but they can work more or less with a family. They can work more or less with neighbors. I hope you guys get together with your neighbors. This is, again, I think one of these problems with communication technology, that we're ignoring geographic neighbors. But then we have coworkers. And again, if we're lucky, again, this is a comment on bullying alone, but we get together and have clubs with people too. So I think this is why we're dominating the ecosystem right now. Because we have language, we can form all these different identities, and we can rapidly switch between the ways we socialize. Right? And so again, I think technology, well, first language, but now with technology, this is really, really changing how we structure ourselves. So my claim here is that concepts like responsibility and intention are the things that allowed us to co-construct who we are, right? And that government enforcements are public goods, and that means for maintaining public goods. So where I'm coming to, which I forgot to say at the beginning, sorry, is that this talk is supposedly about, if you read the abstract, about regulating AI. Too. So after we've talked about AI and how it's affecting us from a biological and anthropological perspective, we're going to start talking about what we can do about that. And this is a slide that I built for people, not so much like you, scientists, but more when I give talks to tech crowds. Although some of you are tech crowds. We just heard the Bristol tech crowd. That the importance of us thinking that regulation isn't some terrible thing that gets imposed on us. It's a way that we keep everything sustainable, right? It's a benefit to us, right? Including just making sure that we don't have to race to the bottom because, like, if somebody cheats in our economic sphere, that we have to cheat too. No, we don't have to cheat. We could go to the police. Okay. So one more talk. Sorry, I think this is the last slide. About how, oh, I'm doing okay for time. Geez, I never use these timey things. I hate them usually. It distracts me. Okay, so the one more slide about the anthropology I want to mention is polarization is also correlated to inequality, just like group-oriented behavior is correlated to communication. And this is something where we don't have an explanation. It didn't came from the math. It's an observed regularity. So this is, I apologize, American data. I'm used to doing comparative work like across species, and now I'm working with an Americanist in political science, so I'm sorry. But anyway, it seems to be held up in other, it's just easier in countries like America where with really ancient, archaic democracies where you have only two parties that can be in the lead at any one time. Britain is unfortunately not that much better. But anyway, because they measure polarization by how much do the parties cooperate on legislation, okay? So there was very high political polarization at the time of World War I, and there's very high political polarization now. And there was also, this is unfortunately the measure of income inequality, but probably wealth inequality is what's doing the driving. And the reason we have this data, and why I'm using American data, is because in 1913, America stupidly banned alcohol. And so we replaced the alcohol tax with the income tax, and that's why we have this data. So what this dark gray line is what proportion of the wealth that the top 1% of the wealth getters got, right? So again, it's a measure of wealth, of income inequality. And you see also that it was disrupted by the war, but and the crash, and after apparently that war and that crash, the elite coalitioned with the proletariat in America, and we had something called the New Deal, Roosevelt and his New Deal. And actually, similar things were happening in the UK. I'm sorry not to show you the graph, but you can read Churchill when he comes back from one of his wars in the late 1900s going, what's going on? It's getting harder and harder to govern. Something strange is happening. And so the liberals, he was a liberal at that point, were sitting there trying to figure out the welfare state. And Germany was also at that time trying to figure out the welfare state because they knew there was something wrong, and maybe they kind of thought it was Marx. But anyway, they figured something out, and both Britain and America brought down polarization first, and then they brought down inequality until about 1978, and then something happened. And people have a lot of theories. You hear people running around talking about the Great Decoupling that happened in 1978. My personal theory is that was about when it became evident that the Soviet economy was tanking. And so people just thought, oh, we don't have to do this redistribution thing. Because during this period, the pay that people got followed productivity. There was this increase, and then then pay plateaus around 1978, but productivity doesn't. And so that productivity is getting captured by the elite. So this is policy. Oh, I think I've told you like every build on this already. Oh, I didn't tell you this one, sorry. So what happened? Why is this inequality? Again, this is suspicion. I'm working with, oh, I don't have his name up here. Oh, there it is. Nolan McCarty is one of the people that gathered all this data. Our suspicion is that maybe when you create a new technology, it doesn't have to be just AI. Any new technology that reduces the cost of distance will by nature decrease the number of winners because you can have more customers, right? So that was probably oil and rail and newspapers and stuff like that in the 19th century. Now it's ICT, right? And so this is what I've already said. Look, it's probably policy. That is just so artificial. It's got to be that people thought we got to do something, and then they thought, oh, we don't need to, which indicates that we can fix it again, right? But it required the elite, again, going back to the tech industry, to realize that the uncertainty and violence of 2 world wars and a crash, and yeah, after 2 world wars and a crash, then we got Bretton Woods. We got international consensus on this, not just individual countries patching up, okay? But like I said, the Bretton Woods thing sort of fell apart, especially in the 90s, when everybody thought, oh, all that stuff is over now. The interesting thing here also, and I don't have time to show this, but you can read some of my papers from 2019. I'll flag them up for you on Twitter after this, is that the ideal Gini coefficient is not 0. Again, this is empirical. There's no theory behind it, but it seems to be about 0.27. So it seems like you do need to be able to provide a gradient to innovation and effort and things like that, or maybe just get the VC where it needs to be, right? So the Gini coefficient is a way of measuring, like, does everybody have the same amount? If we all had the same amount, it would be 0. If one person had all the money, it would be 1. So kind of a quarter is about the right for the motivation. When it gets higher than 0.3, you start getting graffiti and stuff like that. When it gets higher than 0.4, your economy actually starts tanking. There's not enough people participating in it anymore. And unfortunately, I don't know if you've seen this, I hope you've all seen this, the UN has been talking about the just gross inequality and poverty in the UK in the last 15 years that's been building up. So we're in a very serious situation now, which you might have noticed because of Brexit, but Brexit is a symptom, as well as an evil plan. Okay, so now how much time do I have left? I'm now realizing I don't understand my own clock. Okay, all right, because I could skip this slide, but I know everybody loves this. I hate, again, another thing people do not understand is, oh, okay, 5 minutes. Okay, another thing people do not understand is that robots can't take all the jobs because all the jobs is not defined, right? There's an infinite number of things we could do for each other. If I wrote software that made teachers twice as good, right? Nothing about that statement would change whether there would be, the kids would get twice as good of education or that we would spend half as much tax money employing teachers. That is a political decision. There's a bazillion things we could do. We could always innovate new things. And I love the hipster stuff. One of the things I love about Bristol is, that before Bath, you guys got the food, the organic food, and all that stuff. We're starting to get kind of hipster in Bath too. But anyway, so yeah, there's more AI than ever, and there's more jobs than ever. So it's not like AI takes jobs. Again, that's just an observation. But I do worry about how AI is impacting, again, inequality, not only because of that distance thing, right? So one of the examples in this paper, which came from a colleague of Otter's, is that there's actually more human bank tellers now than there were before we had ATMs. I remember the 80s when ATMs came in, right? What changed? The branches became cheaper because you don't need as many humans per branch, right? But rather than fire all those people, they opened more branches, which made the customers happy, right? Well, that was part of the story. In fact, the tellers make more money now too because the machines do the really boring parts, so they're slightly better educated people. However, they also lost out, and I learned this from the Royal Bank of Scotland. I was there giving a talk, and this guy just came up and told me all this cool stuff. There's smart people in the back of banks. And yeah. Anyway, that's another story I don't have time for. I've only got 4 minutes left now. Ask me later in Q&A. So the point is that tellers are now better paid, but there's fewer bank managers. These guys used to make, yes, they were mostly white males. Yes, some of them may have been friends of friends. But by and large, they picked the best of the white males available in the bank to give this money. And then if a school's ceiling collapsed or something, those guys could be there with the philanthropy. It created like connections in society. It was one of the means by which we had a glue between the elite and everybody else, right? So another example like this is truck drivers. So people say, oh no, driverless, all these people aren't going to have jobs. And then other people say, well, nobody wants those jobs anymore. Luciano Flirty was up going, no, nobody's taking these jobs. In fact, the salaries are going up for drivers. Yeah, no, they're not. They're going up a little, but they used to be 50% higher than they are now. Why? Because in the 50s or 60s, there wasn't power steering. Remember how I defined AI? Right? So you had to be really a physically strong person to be able to drive, and you had to be able to navigate with maps, and you had to be able to organize yourself without spreadsheets. It's not really that anyone can do it, but way more people can do it, the salary comes down. There's one less of these well-paying jobs that you can aspire to. All right, so I'm going to skip this because I got like 2 minutes left, but just trust me because he's right. Our entire system of law is based around the fact that we are apes and we've evolved to feel like we need to be social organisms. You cannot build AI that is going to care about being thrown in jail or losing social status or going bankrupt. In fact, this is why shell companies, now it's not a terrible thing to have legal personality for a company. It's a convenience as long as the people that are executive control of that company want it to persist, like your hipster pubs here or whatever, right? But if you have a shell company, it's set up literally to go bankrupt, right? And that is causing all kinds of mayhem right now. We've overextended legal personality again in the 90s. And if we do that with AI, if we say AI is a legal person, that's the ultimate shell company. We're just asking for corruption, all right? We're just asking people to cap their liabilities and say, oh, it's the machine's fault, as we just heard again with the Uber example. All right. So I think there's two solutions, transparency. You should know AI is a construct. You can know how it works. It's not that all AI is really easy to understand. It's that any AI could be made easy to understand, all right? And accountability. That's why I go around with these slides is I'm trying to convince governments that, yes, just hire somebody that knows that there's good ways to build AI to check if it was built correctly so we can check when people have done something corrupt. That famous thing about recidivism was nobody in machine learning that I know in academia and machine learning can do as bad a job of predicting who's going to repeat a crime as that system did. So it looks like somebody wanted African Americans to go to jail, right? But if we don't have this, then we can't know that. Okay, so I will put the rest of my slides online or something. Sorry, just give you the last build on this one. Yeah, there you go. Okay, thanks.